United States steals the official aircraft used by President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Once again, the United States engages in barbaric criminal behavior because they are throwing a tantrum because they didn't get the election result they wanted in Venezuela. The United States claim they have the right to steal the presidential aircraft of Venezuela because Venezuela violated United States sanctions. So according to the Western rules-based order, the United States can slap sanctions on any country they don't like. That gives them the right to then steal the assets of said country. U.S. sanctions is a direct attack on another country's sovereignty and a violation of international law. And this is common practice by the United States, who put sanctions on 1/3 of the world's population and has a foreign policy that was written by pirates. The United States stole billions in oil from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan. The West even seized the funds of Afghanistan, starving their populace because it was upset the Taliban regained power. The United States has stolen Russian funds, and now they have stolen the presidential aircraft of Nicolas Maduro. Joe Biden governs like a modern age fucking Blackbeard. Never forget, the biggest criminals, the most violent thugs in our society are the ruling class who dress themselves up in suits and legalize their insane behavior.
Definitely, thank you. Oh, Jason Call, nice to meet you.
How you doing?
All right, good to see you. All right.
Here, Jamu's here.
Uncle Ajamu, good to see you. How are you? Nice to meet you. Hi, good to meet you, finally.
And none of us brought any of our electronics.
I'm sorry, I'm a hugger, so yeah. Jackie, good to see you.
Yeah.
How are you all doing today?
Hi, how are you? Jennifer's inside. Jennifer's Sullivan.
Yeah.
So we met Jennifer out in Chicago. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm literally live right now. I'm live on my channel. Yeah, we're here. I'm here with the Green Party actually here, and we have, for instance, Jason Call, Juma Baraka. We have Dr. Jill Stein here, who is also running for president of the United States. So it's so good to see all of you here. I wanted to ask you all, why are you here? I know you guys have talked about that earlier before, but please give us why you're here as well.
Well, I mean, this is the place to be. This is where the trial of the century is happening. And we're here to support Chairman Omali Yeshitila and the Uhuru 3 because this is a horrific attack on the African American community. It's an attack on our rights of free speech. And everyone needs to see this as a shot across the bow. They're coming for all of us. Don't think just because you're white you're going to be safe. This is about really, this is kind of the ultimate fascist assault that took place in that early morning raid, and this has to be stopped.
Yeah, we were actually just talking about white people who are accomplices in this and how they're also being attacked even more now because they see that as a threat. So that's definitely very true. Affectionately, Uncle Anjimo. I saw you.
No, I think Jill touched on the key points. That basically this is a case that is the most significant case of its type in probably more than 50 years.
Yeah.
And I think that most people in the U.S. who define themselves as progressive, or even radical, need to understand that, as Jill said, this is a shot across the bow.
Yeah.
This is an attempt to intimidate all of us. If they are allowed to identify you as an agent of a foreign nation because you oppose the official narrative, then all of us are vulnerable. So it's important that the state sees this level of opposition. It's important.
What's poppin', my friends, my family? Welcome back to another episode of RBN Live. Nick in the evening. I tell you guys, we do it Nick at any time. We have a fantastic guest join us. Before I introduce her, I want to just let it be known how proud I am of my brother, James Fauntleroy of RBN, there are many do-nothings in this space, people who don't do anything for their community, many fake journalists who don't do on-the-ground reporting. If there's anyone who has any excuse to do anything, it would be James Fauntleroy, who is disabled, who's going through a lot in his personal life. Despite the fact that he has the number one excuse not to do anything, he formed his own mutual aid organization, inspired people to activism, and I still believe to this day he's the most slept on person in this space who do not get the flowers that he deserved, considering the adversity, the disability that he go through, still on the ground, still showing support for the Uhuru socialist movement, which is easily one of the biggest stories of our time. This is the trial of the century. Meanwhile, no one is covering it. Why is JB the only one on the ground here? Where is the free speech right? Who we told you guys was fraudulent from day one. This is going on in Florida, by the way. You know that? We know Ron DeSantis, the land of the free. They are literally charging a Black activist organization for supporting Russia in their struggle against NATO. And when there's very little coverage of this, but the coverage there is of this, like, for example, I see it in the New York Times, they don't even pretend that there's a crime here. This is just the establishment scaling back your free speech rights. So I'm going to read this. I'm going to introduce our guest here, because I think the silence on this issue is deafening, and there's a reason why they go after Black radicals first. Obviously, the white liberals and the Democrats are all for fascism. They all for silence and free speech. And then you have the free speech right, who don't give a fuck when it happens to Black radicals. They don't give a fuck if it happened to quote-unquote communists. So Black radicals are the first testing ground of how much the neoliberal class can get away with. Let's look at the headline, subheadline. You guys see how absurd this is. Activists charged with pushing Russian propaganda to go on trial in Florida. I don't have a lot of time. Let's just, for the sake of argument, accept everything they are saying at face value. I will not say they're pushing Russian propaganda. I will say they are telling the truth, providing context. But let's, for the sake of simplicity, let's take the argument at face value. Where is it illegal to push propaganda? Everything they're accusing Uhuru of doing is what AIPAC and ADL does out in the open for a genocidal apartheid state. I read the subheadline, I'm gonna get my guests in here. I'm getting fired up just talking about this insanity. Here's the subheadline. Experts say the case offers a window into how Russian government tries to influence American election and promote its own geopolitical agenda. And I see multiple headlines saying that they direct into, oh my God, this is a Russian plot. That's how they get liberals on board. Russiagate. Russiagate turned entire generations of liberals into full-fledged fascists, McCarthyites. So instead of discussing how this is a blatant violation of the free speech rights of Americans and robbing Black radicals of their sovereignty, because you had Chairman O'Malley that explained this many times, there was no directive from Russia. Black people don't need Putin to tell us that our empire is evil. Let's get our guest in here. I want to introduce amazing independent journalist who does great content on her YouTube channel, debunking United States propaganda. You guys know these are our favorite kind of guests. First time you're joining RBN, thank you for making time, Rachel Blevins.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I know you were listening to the rant earlier. I want your thoughts on not only just the insane fascist free speech crackdown against the Uhuru Black Socialist movement, which will impact us all, but also there's a massive fascist push by the West going after journalists. There's this crazy story about what's happening with Sarah Wilkinson, who was violently arrested, all her property smashed, electronic devices seized. Like, this story is wild, and we've seen what happened with Rachel Medhurst. All these people being victims of the counterterrorism act that is spreading across the West, was essentially meant to shatter free speech. And I'm gonna read a little bit of this story just so you guys see how insane it is. But before I get started, I want to properly introduce you and get your general thoughts on this free speech crackdown that's come on the West. Has this been on your radar?
It absolutely has, and I'm glad that you bring up the Uhuru trial because the coverage of that has been non-existent. I mean, the fact that the New York Times covered it, I was actually kind of surprised because the conversation has been nowhere, and the allegations that the government is levying here, we're seeing that kind of spreading. And as you were saying, this was the start of it. You see them going after these Black activists and claiming that, oh, they're unregistered Russian agents, so that they're spreading Russian propaganda. And when you look into it, you're going, okay, are they calling out NATO for its actions that is leading us quickly down the path towards World War III? You're saying that that's Russian propaganda? It's incredibly concerning. And I know that I'm watching it from the perspective of the crackdown that they're seeing on journalists and the fact that you had the FBI carrying out recent raids. I know that they targeted Scott Ritter and Dimitri K. Stimes, and that the New York Times also reported on that, which was kind of interesting. And in their report that they did, they cited anonymous sources basically as a warning to say this is going to continue, right? We are going to see this ramping up. And I think what it all comes down to at the end of the day is the fact that the censorship that they have been putting out there for the last several years, starting with Russiagate, targeting any sort of journalist or activist where they could find any kind of ties to whether it's Russian state-funded media or anything like that, their attempts to censor them have not been successful. And so as a result of that, now they're taking it up a notch. Now they're saying, okay, we're going to raid your homes, we're going to put fear in your life in a way that hasn't been there before with just, taking your channel down from YouTube or from Twitter or Facebook or that sort of thing. And so it is incredibly concerning to see this, especially at a time when, as you were mentioning before, I mean, we're calling out the hypocrisy of US foreign policy because this is our government, because we're holding our government accountable. And it seems like their goal is to take that and to twist that and to say, oh, well, you're just spreading Russian propaganda and rename it. Therefore, the public sees Russian propaganda and then they just stop listening and just kind of march their way towards World War III with no actual concerns.
Yeah, fantastic breakdown. And this is why it's very important for us to cover this, because I've been saying, and many people have been saying that our rights in this country and the West in general are very temporary and conditional. You have a lot of free speech rights. You have all the rights in the world if you're an empire puppet. If you're an establishment puppet pushing empire propaganda, if you're a nice, hardworking worker robot who don't question the narratives of the establishment, then you will enjoy all sorts of rights in the West. Then the West is glorious if you're not willing to shake the boat at all. But if you start questioning the regime, if you start actually threatening the power of the ruling class, you will start to quickly see that those rights are transactional. The Bill of Rights is fraudulent. And this is stuff that the Black radical community has been telling people for decades now. And I'm glad that many people on the right is starting to understand this, but they're hypocritical because you're not seeing any of them cover this. I'm actually pleasantly surprised. Someone who I bash a lot, Tucker Carlson, he covered this. Like, he's supposed to be like the worst of all time, but even at least he covered this story. He interviewed Chairman O'Malley, which is crazy, but everyone else has been completely silent. And what else is interesting, I was thinking about this as well. When you read the story, they accuse them, as you mentioned, of being paid by the Russian government with no evidence. But even if that's true, isn't that what AIPAC, isn't that ADL? And isn't this the same thing they accuse Georgia of doing in controversial fashion? You guys know, I covered this on our channel before. In Georgia, they are accusing them of pushing authoritarianism and autocracy because they implemented the same foreign agents law that's on the book in the United States. Look, here's the headline, and you guys know I covered this before. Georgia approves controversial foreign agents law. And this is essentially saying, man, it's not even illegal to take foreign bribes. Just, hey, if you take foreign bribes, please disclose it. And that act led to a massive meltdown by the neoliberal establishment, having them propose sanctions. Have you seen the story in the West general reaction and the hypocrisy on this issue?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I love how the US, when it's their money, right? When it's their influence in other countries, all of a sudden they start to get really upset and they're going, oh, this infringes upon our free speech. Meanwhile, here, when they have the same laws on the books, and I would argue they abuse them in the case of our Foreign Agent Registration Act laws, they go after media companies, right? They go after, well, in this case, activists, and they claim, oh, well, you're getting some sort of funding. You must be a foreign agent, basically saying that you're a lobbyist and now you have to register. And it's like the level of hypocrisy coming from the US. It would be comical if it wasn't so sad that we sit here and we talk about our free speech and our democracy, and yet you look at what the US is doing to the rest of the world, how it is not only treating countries around the world, but yeah, like the case with this, where you have the US literally using its propaganda arm of our government to go after those and to spark protest in other countries. And yet the US wants to talk about how that's infringing upon free speech. But meanwhile, it's fine if we have laws like that on the books here and we abuse them and go after anyone we can try to tie to any sort of not just Russian funding, but Russia in general.
I'm going to read a little bit of the New York Times coverage because I was very interested in seeing how the corporate media is going to spin this fascism. They don't even try. They don't even try. An unusual trial. Oh, you don't say. An unusual. It's only the trial of this fucking century that decides whether we have free speech or not. Just the entire free speech right, just not talking about it at all.
Exactly. That's it's always, and I'm glad that you point that out, because I always find whenever I'm reading the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever, to pay attention for the way that they phrase their sentences, because that tells you everything you need to know, right? The words that they choose, that tells you what you're supposed to be thinking based on this article. I feel like they're very a little bit clever and crafty there, but very obvious at the same time.
Absolutely well stated, because I'm a nerd when it comes to this stuff. I'm fascinated with how the ruling class attempts to propaganda, which works on way more people than they think. What I mean by that, there are a lot of people who think they're not propagandized by New York Times, especially a lot of the right wingers, the independent right leaning men. And I don't trust CNN, I don't trust MSNBC, but then they have the same exact position on socialism as they tell them to. They will have the same exact position on Kim Jong-un, North Korea, Venezuela, things that they have no idea about. And they I'm a free thinker. Are you, sir? I doubt it. Because our system actually does a great job with these weasel words and statements. And you can tell by this the first 2-3 words here alone is a admittance of guilt, an unusual trial. Yeah, you don't say. Kind of crazy what's happening here. And they also admit something else, which I explained earlier. We were one of the few channels that actually explained why the Uhuru Black Socialist Movement is being targeted. You guys know why? Because they're a threat to power. Not only do they organize a mutual aid on the ground, doing real work, building outside political power, they also do what socialists and Marxists believe, what I believe, that you need to form socialist and Marxist parties and run socialist and Marxist parties. So do you guys know that Uhuru, despite them being in Florida, they in a very competitive district. It's kind of purplish. But despite the fact that they don't put that much of their resources into electoral politics, they believe, and Chairman Amali spoke about this, that they should always give people an option. This is what I believe. I believe you all should give people an option to vote against corruption. So they consistently run candidates. And those candidates cost Democrats countless elections because they pull the support that Democrats need to defeat the Republicans. So not only that they're debunking empire propaganda, they're causing Democrats victories, at least according to them. That's not how Uhuru was classified. That's not even how I would classify it. But in their mind, they see this Black socialist organization that's actually engaging in direct action, mutual aid, while at the same time putting their name on the ballot and screwing Democrats. So now they're going after them. And they admitted, look, involves obscure candidates for local office. That's exactly why they went after them, my friend. Activist groups far outside the political mainstream and relatively little money changing hands. I don't know why they even mentioned that. But experts say, whoever the fuck experts is, says it offers a rare glimpse into how Russia had tried for decades to secretly influence American politics. And this is insane to me, insanely insulting. I don't need Iran and Russia to convince me the United States military and empire does not have my interest in mind. I don't need Russia to tell me that it's wrong to arm neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Do you need China or Russia to tell you that, Rachel?
I do not. And to go back to your earlier point, I want to know when the AIPAC trial is, because they came out and they literally explicitly said, hey, we are funneling all of this money to go after more progressive leaning candidates who are literally just calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, right? They're calling for the US to stop supporting an all-out genocide. They're calling for an arms embargo on Israel, things that, while I get AIPAC may see them as extreme, anyone paying attention, anyone that's watching the daily footage of the Palestinian children that are just being massacred, having their homes and their families destroyed in Gaza, that's not extreme whatsoever. That's something that every American should be paying attention to and calling for. And yet AIPAC is there trying to go after any candidate that literally is just standing up and saying, hey, maybe we should rethink this a little bit. And yet the US government just throws their hands up and they're like, I don't know, we need to focus on Russia and China and Iran and not focus on the very obvious funding and influence that is here in this country, in our political system. The only difference is that they've tried to normalize that by making it so obvious and so apparent. Yet when it comes to Russia or Iran, they act as though these foreign nations, that they have some kind of preferred candidate, right? They act as though Trump, or I guess in this case, Kamala Harris, that they are going to come in and bring some sort of peace with Russia, China, or Iran. And it doesn't seem like, from looking at the top two contenders, that any of them are going to do anything like that. It seems like they are going to continue with the same establishment line, which has gotten us to the place where we're currently in right now.
Yeah, well said. I'm gonna continue this article, and then you guys see the title. The main story, Uhuru story, I definitely wanted to dive in a little bit longer than I planned, but I wanted to cover the meltdown going on in Israel, the protests. I don't know if you've seen that or not. We'll cover that here next. I'm gonna just get a little bit more into this article because, as you see, the New York Times don't even try to explain why what they did is a crime. I don't know if you guys have been skipping ahead, but this next paragraph explains how the Uhuru socialist movement has contacts with Russia, which they don't deny. There's nothing illegal with talking to people in other countries. We don't need permission from our government to talk to people from other countries. The idea that we do is insane. The fact that people will even suggest that, we need to put in a permission slip to our government in order to have contacts with people who share common belief systems with us across the pond. This is insane. Look, you see, they established that they had calls, emails, and electronic messages with Moscow. Oh no, they had emails, Rachel. It was emails, the messages. How is this illegal? This is the ruling class literally scaling back our rights. This is the ruling class trying to redefine the social contract, telling us what we cannot do. And people are going 100% along with it. Look, the group, which had a presence in Florida, then promoted Russian views on this website. Where's the crime? 3 paragraphs in, I haven't seen one damn crime yet.
Yeah.
They promoted Russia views on their social media accounts, Rachel. Oh my God, the social media accounts.
Right. And their claim of Russian views, it's like, okay, what is that? Even if they were literally sitting there saying Russia is the greatest country ever, it's like still not a crime. right? You're claiming that this goes back to that sort of talking points that they want to add in there, and it's just insane that basically what this is a warning sign to anyone who does anything similar that you could be the next one to be targeted.
If you're not convinced by my argument yet, I'm gonna have a hard time debunking this one. They are being accused of saying that Russian athletes can participate in the Olympics. The horror. I guess my argument that they're not criminals was just blown away. How dare you advocate that Russians can compete in the Olympics? Oh my God. Throw them into guys. You know they are facing 15 years in prison for saying that Russians should be able to compete in the Olympics. Russia's still banned. Israel is slaughtering Palestinian athletes en masse, but the Olympics allow them to compete. Am I allowed to say that, or will I be locked up in prison? I guess the international community, according to the rules-based order, draws the line of criticizing the Olympics. If you criticize the Olympics, then they lock them up. Is this what people think should happen? Like, this is literally one of the craziest stories I ever covered, and no one's touching it.
Mm-hmm.
And look at this part. 5 paragraphs in, you guys got to scroll down a little bit. 5 paragraphs in, they just now showing the argument made from Uhuru. Look at this. The defendants who pleaded not guilty says the United States government is criminalizing dissent protected under the First Amendment. You don't fucking say. So the Uhuru movement, like, hey man, we not guilty. We have this thing called the First Amendment. And then the media is like, well, the defendants say they have this thing called the First Amendment. No, the case is over. What are you talking about? Do we have the First Amendment or not? Look how they just go quickly past that. They claim the U.S. government is criminalizing dissent, protected under the First Amendment. That's exactly what they're doing. Case over. How was this not thrown out immediately?
Yeah, that's another thing. It brings up the conversation of the judges here in this country, who it is incredibly concerning that this case could even go to trial, as you're pointing out there, to think that a judge looks at this and goes, oh no, they posting on their social media saying that Russians should be able to compete in the Olympics. We better go to trial. It's like, this is the level of insanity that we're at right now, that this was justified by anyone, let alone got to this point.
Yeah, and I'm a pivot here. I'm gonna read some super chats real quick, and then I think that's good. I'm gonna continue our coverage of this. JB, who everyone should be subscribed to, by the way. If you're not getting the true RBN experience unless you subscribe to everyone in the RBN networks, individual channel as well. Savvy is live right now. You know, we got a double header tonight in the RBN network. Make sure you guys subscribe to Savvy. JB Font as well. JB Font is so slept on, it actually hurts my heart. Like, actually, it keeps me up at night. It pisses me off how much all the work that he puts in, and he don't get the credit that he deserves. He on the ground covering the trial of the Uhuru movement. Meanwhile, people with giant studios, expensive budgets. JB is poor. We're working class people here. He on disability, which is non-existent essentially in Florida. Meanwhile, he's doing mutual aid, covering the trial of the century on the ground, doing interviews, doing activities. So please, my friends, make sure you subscribe to JB to get the full coverage, because I want to show you a little bit the part that warmed my heart when he met Jill Stein and John Baraka, and he got to talk to them. But he had an hour-long coverage. Make sure you guys subscribe to his channel. So that's my shameless plug for my brother. Someone said for the link. Fuck, I should have the link, shouldn't I? Just here, I'm gonna put the link in the description of his live stream afterwards. Just here to support as a class trader. Thank you for the 1999 rebirth of Cool. Thank you for the $5, Shinobili. Thank you for $5. Jimmy Dore just had on Proud Zionist Rob Schneider, is that it? For an interview, and didn't ask him about Gaza once. Not once. Fucking shameful. I would have asked him about Gaza. I always find it interesting. You guys hate watch the shit out of Jimmy. I don't watch content that I don't find interesting. Like, if it's not interesting to me, if it's not a topic I'm not interested, I'm not gonna watch it. So I always find it weird, and I think that's legitimate criticism. But I think it's weird that you guys hate watch so much. It's so weird. Like, I be looking at the comments. We be talking about the genocide in Gaza. We be talking about the free speech trial of Uhuru. I be talking about all these important topics. I'll be talking about Venezuelan sanctions, the Cold War against China, all these hard-hitting issues. And as I'm talking about these hard-hitting issues, I see people talking about Jimmy in the chat. Like, the fuck? We're talking about genocide right now. We're talking about the Uhuru. Like, so why does Jimmy keep getting mentioned? I don't get why people center him in their politics. If they don't like him, don't watch the channel. I don't get it. But I think that's fair criticism. I just don't get the obsession and the focus, if that makes sense. And we had another super chat. So I appreciate you. I'm not trying to put back too hard. I just don't get it. If you don't like Jimmy, just don't watch. Just say it. That's why
You're still giving him the views at the end of the day. So if you really aren't that much of a fan,
yeah, I don't get it. I'm not saying that people don't have legitimate criticism. You guys know I'm friends with Jimmy, but I don't get centering him. I'm friends with Jimmy, but I don't focus on Jimmy as much as you guys do. It's fucking weird. But anyway, thanks for $5. Once again, I appreciate the super chats, and I think that's a legitimate criticism. I'm not even knocking the criticism because I would ask him that. But here's another super chat. What made it worse? See, like, this dude fuming. What made it worse is Steph refused to read super chats that called out Rob for being a Zionist. Once again, the legitimate criticism. I'm not here to shield Jimmy from criticism. I just don't understand the obsession.
he just kept going.
It's on there. Fair enough, man. Fair enough. Jimmy's my friend. He's not perfect. Let's move on to some topics. I appreciate the super chats. I appreciate the dialogue, as always. I'm gonna ask you very vaguely. I saw you did great coverage. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. You covered the terrorism in the West Bank. I think with Dan Kovalik, I believe. So I want to ask you about that because I've been covering extensively how the Biden administration has been enabling Israeli terrorism in the West Bank. So I'll read this headline to get you warmed up because I've been doing extensive coverage on this. You have these extremist settlers that in coordination, I cannot emphasize this enough, with coordination with the IDF, is launching terrorist attacks and seizing the West Bank. So I want to ask you about this very vaguely just to get us warmed up into this topic. What's your thoughts on how the Biden administration has been handling the Gaza conflict? Once again, very vaguely, in the extremist actions in the West Bank. I would love to hear your perspective before I get started.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I know for the last 11 months nearly, much of the focus has been on the Gaza Strip, on Israel's ongoing bombardment and blockade of Gaza, and rightfully so. But at the same time, you've also had Israel still targeting the West Bank, increasing their settlements there, arming settlers there. You've seen a lot of increased violence, a lot of increased, I would call them kidnappings, right? Them taking Palestinians off of the streets, putting them behind bars without any sort of charges, as we're now finding out more and more committing horrible, awful, violent acts of abuse towards these prisoners. And now all of a sudden it's in the headlines because we're seeing a 7th day of raids carried out by Israel in the West Bank. And it's been interesting to watch from the standpoint of the fact that, Israel will claim that, we have to go into the Gaza Strip. We have to, quote unquote, eliminate Hamas there. Well, they're 11 months in. They have not destroyed Hamas. And then when it comes to the West Bank, they aren't able to have the same argument, right? They can't claim that Hamas is in control here, therefore we have to go and target the Palestinians here. So then they claim that, there was a Hamas commander, right? That was why we, had to raid a refugee camp and kill over a dozen Palestinians because we had to get this one commander. And it's just a reminder I think it should be a reminder to all of us at the end of the day that this is not about Hamas. It's about the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. It's about expanding those Israeli settlements. That's why we've seen this be a key issue. Their goal is to get Palestinians off of their own land and for Israel to continue to expand. It's part of this greater Israel project that, Netanyahu has talked very openly about. And so when it comes to the United States, it has been interesting to watch the Biden administration's response to all of this because it wants to act as though there is some semblance of international law when it comes to the West Bank, right? They want to talk about, we could throw out some sanctions. We could, target some of these settlers a little bit. Sure, we'll do that. But yeah, when it comes to the Gaza Strip, they're sending 2,000-pound bombs to, use on one of the most densely populated areas on earth in which you have 1 million children there. They have no moral compass when it comes to Gaza. But when it comes to the West Bank, where you already have many Israeli settlers, then all of a sudden the US is acting as though, oh, we need to talk about, some sort of international law, or we need to do something in response. And it would be, again, I think it goes back to, it would be laughable if it wasn't so incredibly horrible, the blatant US hypocrisy that we're seeing all around yet again.
Yeah, the West Bank exposes the barbarism of Zionism in the West like none other, and it exposes how we have irredeemable traitors in our government, including one that is running to be president in the Democratic Party right now, that a lot of, I can't describe people like AOC and the Bernie left supporting Kamala other than genocide enablers, because they keep pretending, and Kyle Kulinski, the cuck, has a video. And the only reason I know this is because Hotspot posted this video that I haven't seen yet. Apparently, I might have to do a breakdown of this, where he trying to lie to his audience that Kamala Harris will end the genocide in Gaza, even though she said no such thing. She said that there will be no conditions on Israeli weapons. But you guys know what Kamala did as a senator? Because as I mentioned, and you had Ben Burgess, who called me an anti-Semite for bringing up facts. The Vanguard called me an anti-Semite for bringing up how Kamala married her AIPAC handler husband, who advocated for the censorship of Americans based on their criticism of the Zionist regime. And because he guides Kamala Harris' position on Israel, Kamala Harris, as a senator, teamed up with Marco Rubio and the most far-right disgusting senators in this country in order to condemn a UN resolution that called out illegal Israeli settlements and terrorism in the West Bank. Kamala Harris joined Marco Rubio and the most insane Zionists in this country, Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham and Kamala Harris locked hands in order to endorse Israeli terrorism. Meanwhile, Rachel Maddow-looking cucks like Kyle Kulinski is trying to convince us that she will reign in Israel. And I get called an anti-Semite for bringing up these very real examples how the Biden administration will continue to enable this. I was one of the few people who reported on this. Well, I know for a fact that the Democrat enablers didn't. Do you guys know? Actually, I should show you guys another headline because I found this while I was looking for this. Let me try and find this just to show you how the media is complicit with this. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Here it is. I think this is one. Go ahead if you want to try. Rachel, feel free to chime in.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm with you. And I think that, Harris and her team, they watch Biden become Genocide Joe, and they know that they don't want whatever Kamala Harris version of that nickname is going to be yelled out by protesters that show up to her rallies. So that's why you've seen her dance around this and be like, oh, I'm not going to stay silent about the Palestinians. Well, at the same time, making it very clear, as you noted, even in that CNN interview that she did with Tana Bash, where they're saying, no, I wouldn't consider an arms embargo. So basically what she's saying is, there's no way I would reign in Israel, because that's the only way that Israel is going to listen, is if you take the weapons away. If you just kind of kindly talk to them and you're like, hey, could you quit killing so many Palestinian kids? It really doesn't look good. They don't care, and they've made it very clear that they don't care, and therefore I'm with you. I don't think that there's going to be any difference in Harris or really even Trump on this issue when it comes to their support for Israel.
This is why people who keep saying Kamala and Biden support ceasefire, I can't stand. Like, words mean something. Mm-hmm. Do you guys know what a ceasefire means? You could have a ceasefire if you stop sending them the weapons. It's that simple. And here is Israel that openly admits this fact that this war wouldn't be able to be fought without United States aid. Here's just one of many examples. Israeli Air Force officials, without U.S. aid, Israel couldn't fight Gaza beyond a few months. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez want to convince you that Biden and Kamala is working tirelessly for a ceasefire as they send Israel weapons. They pretend that Biden care about human rights as they arm Israeli terrorist units. Now, I decided I'm going to present this a little bit differently because I want to show you guys how the media is complicit and what Cal and them will do. Cal, Crystal, all these fake progressive media people, they will take these fraudulent headlines. So they do this all the time. The Biden administration weighs Is it? This is not the article I was looking for. There's no article I was looking for. Where they here, let me show you guys. I meant to click this one. I clicked the wrong one. This is the one I meant to click. The U.S. holds off sanctioning Israeli military unit. So they start up with the headlines, but they say
6 months
the
into
Biden
the Israel-Hamas war, Israel is fighting on two fronts: the war in Gaza and the war of.
They will have these headlines where they say the Biden administration is considering sanctioning Israeli terrorist units in the West Bank. Then the Democratic Party propagandists would take those headlines to see. They will say, "See, this is an example of why Democrats are better than Republicans. See, Biden is trying to reign in Israel." And then they will let that headline sit for a few weeks, and then it will later come out, as always, that you know how they was weighing sanctioning Israeli terrorist units. Oh, they decided not to. And then the same people who did propaganda saying that Biden is willing to sanction those units will never cover the follow-up. They will never cover the story where they say, "Oh, well, we actually did make a decision. We decided to arm them." And then in this article, they explain. I love the headline here as well. They say accused of human rights violations. Okay. But in this article, they explain that the Biden administration is going to continue weapons shipments to the same Israeli terrorist unit that executed an elderly Palestinian man, which started the investigation in the first place. They're going to continue to provide them arms. But people want to convince us, Rachel, that Biden and Kamala are the lesser of two evils. Whenever they do that genocide denial. Anything you want to add before I continue? I'm going to get to the last part of the story. But before I do that, is there anything you want to add to this, Rachel, before I move on?
Yeah, I would just say, I think it's very apparent, and we saw this with the Trump and Biden debate, right? When they're sitting back and forth and going, okay, I'm more pro-Israel. No, I'm more pro-Israel. And it's like, we have a genocide going on, right? But the U.S. is literally supporting the killing of not just tens of thousands of Palestinians, but likely hundreds of thousands of Palestinians when it's all said and done. And yet you have these, in that case, it was two old guys who were sitting there fighting back and forth. And in the case of Harris, I know that there is going to be a lot said about the fact that, oh, she's the first woman in this position, right? She's the first woman of color. Like, we have achieved something. And it's like, if she's still sending the bombs, if she's still carrying out the exact same policies that are enabling a genocide, then we have not accomplished anything. All you've done is just put it in a different package, but it doesn't change the fact that, the Palestinians are still being wiped out and that the US is still enabling it, because I agree 100%. There's no way that Israel would be able to carry out the crimes that it is, not with the support that it's receiving from any other country in the world. It all comes down to the United States. That is their biggest enabler at the end of the day. And you've got AIPAC sitting there, just doling out the money, knowing that they have these politicians in Washington, a lot of them stuck, because if they speak out for the Palestinian people, then they become target number one. They could lose their seat in Congress. And at the end of the day, they're also selfish that they're not actually going to speak out for an ongoing genocide, because it could mean the loss of their job on their end.
Yeah, well said, Rachel. I'm gonna discuss the chaos going on in Israel next. That was the main subject today. I know that's what everyone's waiting for. There's going to be a high cost to pay for this genocide, and I heard amazing anti-Zionist scholars say this for years and decades. And for a long time, I didn't quite understand what they meant. I remember hearing Kwame Ture explain how the Zionist regime is inherently unstable. And many people made the intellectual argument that this apartheid Zionist regime, if not destroyed by the justified struggle of the Palestinian people, it will inherently collapse because it's an unstable project. It's a state built on shaky moral foundations that is built on hypocrisy. And they'll use make these arguments. And you guys see, I'm not even as well versed in making this argument as they are, but I was always skeptical of that, because I was always like, nah, we need to be the ones who set the destruction of the Zionist regime. But the argument was always made that this thing's a powder keg and it's not going to last that long forever. And I am now starting to see what they mean by that. So a few weeks ago, we had damn near a civil war break out over Israeli soldiers' right to rape Palestinian men to death. And there was damn near a civil war. Now you have a civil war that started because many of the idiot Israelis are just now realizing that Benjamin Netanyahu don't give a fuck about the hostages.
Yeah, took them 11 months to get there.
Now, the Western media has done a horrible job reporting on this story and Israel politics in general. So there is massive unrest in Israel, but the way the corporate media, and I paid myself this morning to watch a Morning Joe segment on this just to see how the corporate media is covering this. It was horrific. It was very painful, but I had to know what the enemy is saying, guys. And what they're saying is the narrative they're creating is that the country is fed up with Netanyahu. They want the war crimes to be ended, and they want to create, the people want the two-state solution. So that's why they're rising up against Netanyahu. Ignoring the fact that polls show the majority of Israelis support Netanyahu's military actions. Mm-hmm. What the people are upset because Netanyahu failed to take out Hamas. And what they also don't cover is how there's actually a very large pro-Netanyahu faction in the Israeli populace that is engaging in skirmishes with the anti-Netanyahu faction. We are literally seeing brawls in the streets, police being assaulted, not only because people are upset with the government, because the extreme fascist settlers support Netanyahu's aims as well. The opposition party in Israel supports Netanyahu. And they are supportive of Netanyahu against the corruption charges, against the protests that were going against them. You had the opposition leader that even said that we need Netanyahu in the current government as strong as possible. There will be no opposition. That's his quote. He said there will be no opposition to all the people who want to see an uprising in Netanyahu. They're not going to happen. So as you have that happen, you had the police clashing with these protesters and labor because they're realizing that Netanyahu never cared about the hostages. Once again, 11 months, 10 months in the conflict, they're now realizing this. Even though Israel engaged in the Hannibal Directive, where they purposely tried to murder Israeli hostages, killed countless Israeli hostages over the last few months. So it's clear as day they never care about the hostages. They had a botched raid. The media, one more thing I'm going to say, I'll get you in here. I know you guys probably have a lot to say as well. I got a lot to sum up here. Last thing I'm going to say, you have a lot of media that not explaining why the hostages was killed. You had Hamas that explained earlier that if Israel engaged in a military solution to freeing the hostages instead of negotiating and accepting the deal that even the Biden administration wanted them to accept, which they did not, which was a fraudulent ceasefire. Hamas accepted the UN resolution ceasefire, which would have ended military conflict with Israel, but the ceasefire that the Biden administration supports, that even Israel didn't support, said that we will have a temporary ceasefire, but we will continue in 6 weeks, which is not a real ceasefire. So Hamas said we are down to release the hostages, but you cannot have a military solution to this problem. So what the IDF did is they did a failed raid. They don't tell you this in the media. It was a failed raid, and because the result of that failed raid, Hamas executed the hostages because of that. So the military solution to freeing the hostage was a failure. This is something that I said on RBN months ago. This is stuff that people who are critical of the Netanyahu regime said for a very long time, that there is no military solution to freeing the hostages. They tried, they fucked up, and their direct military action got the hostages killed. Now, I know that was a long presentation there, so I'll pass to you, Rachel, if you have anything you want to add to this. And I'm going to discuss how, as you guys see here, the Israeli economy is in shambles. There are general strikes that are being threatened. But before I continue, I know there was a lot said here. I'm going to give you opportunity to chime in, Rachel. Anything you want to add as well?
Yeah. It is interesting, isn't it, how when you go back to, say, October 7th of last year, and you could argue that Israel was more united than ever, right? That they had a common enemy in the sense that when Netanyahu stood up and he said, we are going to destroy Hamas, you had the overwhelming majority of people in Israel who supported that. They may not have been a big fan of Netanyahu, but they supported that goal. And polls continued to show that they didn't care how many Palestinians were being killed. They didn't care that Israel was enacting a full-on blockade. The fact that you had food, water, electricity, fuel, everything cut off. The fact that now, as we've seen it, the Palestinians have been displaced time and time again, just in unimaginable conditions for all of us that are watching this play out online. And yet the Israelis didn't actually care. And yet when it comes to the situation with the hostages, it seems as though, like you were saying, they're just kind of figuring out now that Netanyahu is not in it for the hostages, that he had no plan to ever make sure that these hostages were freed. And those 6 hostages that were killed, one of them was an American. And yet, what is the US doing, right? They didn't even go in there and get their hostages out. And that's something that in the very early days back in October, I don't know if you remember if this was something that you covered, but Russia actually at the time, they got their hostages out. They had a Hamas delegation they brought over to Russia. They talked with them and they said, look, we are going to get our hostages out. They did it successfully. And that's something that the US has refused to do. They have refused to do anything to support their own people. And yet they've been so focused on Israel and what Israel wants. And yeah, they could have had a deal done months ago. Literally, Hamas has said, make sure that there is a lasting ceasefire, that this is not just some, temporary halting and bombing. No, but Israel doesn't want that. Netanyahu doesn't want that. And so when it comes back to the place that Israel is now in, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that their economy is struggling or that people are fleeing, because a lot of these people, they have second passports. So where are they going to go? The country that they have a passport for that is not in danger of being bombed. And yet, if the Israeli government is sitting there wondering, why are people leaving? Oh, well, maybe you shouldn't be carrying out not just a full-on genocide targeting the Palestinian people, but in addition to that, maybe you shouldn't be carrying out targeted attacks and assassinations, targeting Palestinian diplomat and Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh while he was in Tehran. It's like when you do something like that, now Israel for weeks now has been in this constant state of fear, right? Of wondering, what is that retaliation going to look like? They would never have had to worry about that if they hadn't carried out the assassination in the first place. So it is interesting to see how every single one of these problems that we talk about for Israel, they created all of them, right? They put themselves in this position and now they are having to live with just the beginning of the consequences for it.
Yep, and Netanyahu, despite all the protests, people don't understand that Israel is a deeply fascist society. Netanyahu's still defiant, as protesters demanding a ceasefire for hostages deal bring Israel to hot. So it's clear that Netanyahu wants to keep this war going. Many people in Israel, in his cabinet, want to keep this war going. A lot of people don't acknowledge that as well. But because Netanyahu cares about his own political ambitions. So the result of this, and I had this receipt up earlier, not only do you have the success of the BDS movement that's harming Israeli society even more now because of the increased awareness of the genocidal regime, you have the most effective form of anti-Zionist resistance, what we've seen from Ansar Allah and their blockade of the Red Sea, which is devastating to the Israeli economy. You had thousands and thousands of Israeli businesses closed since the beginning of this conflict. Like, it's bad in Israel. And I'm going to read this headline. I had this up earlier, but I'm going to read it for the people who are not watching the screen. Israel's economy in grave danger as Gaza war drags on. So as you have the economy that is struggling in Israel, you have union leaders that vow to halt Israel economy, and there is now call for a general strike. And I found this interesting because I was digging up more receipts in preparation for this show. So and this is the update today, they had this general strike plan. It was approved of by labor, and then it was shut down by the labor courts. You know how fucked Israel is as a country, where you had the courts that literally had to strike down this potential labor strike. Look, this is a deeply fascist society in shambles. Look at this. Israel's labor strike over hostages is called off after court order. The only thing keeping Israel together is pure fascism. The country is a powder keg, and there are a ton of Israeli settlers who are furious about this, and it's only going to get worse. The last thing I want to add, and I'll pass it back to you, Rachel, to tie a bow on this segment. We'll begin to wrap up here very soon. There's also reports of tens of thousands of Israeli settlers fleeing. You're seeing and that was another thing that caused the economy of Israel to falter. What happens when you have thousands of people leave and no longer in the market? That will hurt the economy. It's all these factors. There's a lot to sum up quickly here. But you have Ansar Allah, the general strikes, BDS. Then you have the settlers fleeing their own project. Just like our intellectual brothers and sisters of the past, they was on point. And I didn't even realize it, Rachel. The settler colonial Zionist regime is undoing itself, which is something I was trying to explain in this presentation. Hopefully, hope I did a good job at it. Rachel, any final thoughts that you have on this topic before we begin to wrap up?
Yeah, I think you did a great job of breaking it down. And I would just add one thing, and this is something that, over the last nearly 11 months now, there have been times where people may watch this resistance movement that's forming with Ansar Allah in Yemen, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, with Iran just as itself, right? They may watch the resistance and think, why aren't they doing more, right? Why aren't they enacting an all-out war? And one thing that we have seen is a lot of patience, right? We've seen a lot of patience over these last several months, but now we're starting to see the payoff. Now you're starting to see why Hezbollah has made it clear that, look, we are going to continue these border clashes. We are going to continue to target you because we've seen all these settlers fleeing off of, the northern area in Israel and fleeing the settlements there. And the reason why you have Hezbollah and Iran and Ansar Allah continuing on in this fashion, they have all said, look, you stop bombing the Palestinians and this stops, right? You stop committing a genocide and we will stop. But as long as you continue on, then you can enjoy this blockade in the Red Sea and you can enjoy these ongoing border clashes, and these tensions will continue. And Israel is in this place. And I know that, going back to the fascist society, going back to the fact that Netanyahu has to stay at war in order to keep his government and his party in particular happy, because he's in that position, then the war continues, then the ongoing tensions and clashes continue. And so if there is any sort of undoing of Israel at the end of the day, it's their own fault, right? They did all of this to themselves. And while it may be, more of a drawn out process, it's not something that's going to happen immediately. I think it is one of those things where we're starting to kind of see the writing on the wall that they have made their bed. Now they're being forced to lie in it. And the US is right there with them, sending more weapons and enabling them the entire way.
Yeah, fantastic breakdown. It was great to have this discussion with you. I want to hit you with two not necessarily rapid fire questions, but something I want to bring up and get your perspective on as we wrap up. Make sure you guys follow Rachel Blevins. I definitely will after this. It was a great, enjoyable conversation. A few more things I want to ask you though before we wrap up. I saw this as I was preparing my stream today, and I found it interesting. So shout out to Glenn for highlighting this to me. This person was explaining how Americans, and this is something I've been talking about on my show as well, how they don't even understand how much the United States support for the genocide in Gaza hurt its standing on the world stage. I mean, we even have U.S. puppets, people who usually fall in line with U.S. Foreign policy, like in Japan. There's massive pro-Palestinian demonstrations in Japan, in South Korea. Guys, these are U.S. puppets in Asia. They're the many countries who had a neutral opinion on the United States was like, we still do business with them. We still support their hegemonic dominance. They're like, fuck this. And the result of the genocide, as big shout out to Zach and Glenn for highlighting it for me, is now you have Asia that now overwhelmingly say they prefer an alignment with China over the United States. Americans don't fully understand how abhorrent our country stands on Gaza seem to affect the world. So this shows the amount of people who support the United States dropping in polls. But I'm gonna pass it to you, Rachel. And my question very broadly is how the United States influence seems to be waning. Their hegemonic dominance seems to be slipping because of the development of BRICS. More countries in the global majority wants to do business with China. Is this something that you've been covering? And I would love to hear your perspective about what I view as a massive multipolar shift. Do you see it the same way?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's been kind of interesting, I guess, going back to, Israel doing all of this to themselves. The US is in the exact same boat on this one. I mean, they have become this powerful empire. We saw 2 decades of this so-called war on terror in which the US felt like it was able to go into any country it wanted, right, to bomb that country, to overthrow the government there. And then in the last few years, it has stopped quote unquote working, I would say, because obviously it's not like the war in Afghanistan or Iraq, like those were resounding successes for the US. But when the US decided to go up against Russia, when they decided that they were going to get the rest of the world to sanction Russia, and I know that, the US government, the New York Times, whatever, they can say that I'm just parroting Russian talking points here, but I would argue that the facts are out there and very clear. When the US did that, that drew a line for many in the world, right? They were looking at the US and going, really? You think you're going to, all of these smaller countries around the world rely heavily on Russia for their natural resources. And so now they're being put in a position of going, okay, I sanction Russia, I cut off trade with them. What do I get for it, right? What is the US giving me in return? And then they realize, oh, that's not how the US empire works. It does not give you good things in return. It just gives you orders and expects you to follow them, or else it claims that there are some sort of consequences. And so I think now to be in a position where we're watching more and more people wake up. You had sort of an awakening in 2022 and over the last 2.5 years when it came to Russia. You have a version of that with China. And now you're seeing people go, wait a second, I'm watching a genocide being live streamed online, right? I can go on Facebook or Twitter or X and see on any given day these horrific videos of Palestinians being targeted. I can see the horrific statements that Israeli officials have made in which they've displayed genocidal intent for all to see. And they've continued to do so. I mean, they've made statements as recently as the last few weeks. And so when you're able to see evidence of that, then all of a sudden you're looking and you're going, okay, wait a second. How is Israel able to do all this? Oh, it's the United States. The United States is not only supporting this genocide, but it is become so ingrained in the US political world that if you dare to speak out against it, then you risk losing your seat in Congress. And so I think, again, it goes back to starting to see that transition. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does cause a lot of people around the world to wake up and to realize that when it comes to where we are in history right now, the US and Israel are just not on the right side of it.
Yeah, very well said. And I think it's funny that you said people will accuse you of repeating Russian propaganda for saying the facts. But anything that goes against the empire narrative is just propaganda. Anyone who advocates for ceasefire is advocating for Hamas. If you advocate for peace in Ukraine, you're advocating for Putin. Everything they are told in the West is completely insane and flipped upside down, which is why we try to hammer on our channels. People are told nonsense and they just take it at face value. Last topic I want to ask you about, another quick little rapid fire segment I want to cover. You have Holocaust Harris that is running a vibes campaign filled with joy. That's the narrative they want you to believe. This is a joyful pro-genocide campaign. And they was able to get away with it for the first few weeks, shutting down a few anti-genocide protesters, set up a cop city in Chicago to protect the ruling class from the masses during the DNC, roughing up anyone who call out the genocidal protesters. Just normal capitalist shit. Vibing, having a joyful stint of authoritarianism. And it was fun while it lasted. there's a reason why you've seen all these articles pop up. And I'm gonna put it in the background playing. There's articles that started popping up again, talking about how Jews feel unsafe on campus. This is why the ADL went after me, because I saw this psyop coming a long time ago. So the ADL called me anti-Semitic. Ben Burgess called me anti-Semitic. The Vanguard, everyone called me anti-Semitic because I said this is a fucking psyop that is being promoted in order to rob people of their free speech rights. So I guess that made me anti-Semite for noticing stuff like that. They were pushing these articles because they knew the second that summer breaks ends, the Vibe campaign is over. So they was vibing, having a joyous campaign, but that went because school wasn't in session. Columbia started. And you want to know the first thing they did, as you guys see? Big shout out to my homies at Hotspot for highlighting this for me. The first day of class in Columbia, students are already back at it. So I'm gonna have these playing in the background, but I want to pass it to you. This is our last question of the stream. It was great having you on. It was a great conversation. I want to ask you about the mass protests and the shift we have seen in the West against Israel. Like, I've covered this issue since I started as a citizen journalist 4 years ago, something I've been covering for a long time. Even before I was a citizen journalist, I was always an issue I was interested in. I've never seen the action and the intensity against Zionism and the U.S. empire like it is today. So I want to get your thoughts on the protest, your thoughts on the election if you want to share as well. Very general thoughts on the upcoming mass protests. Because if Democrats thought it was bad before, wait until this upcoming semester. So I'm going to pass to you very generally to discuss the protests and the resistance against Zionism we are seeing in the West.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've been at this since 2014, and I remember back in the summer of 2014, Israel was openly bombing Gaza, and at the time I was looking around going, why aren't journalists covering this, right? Why isn't there more talk about this? Why is everything just sounding like it's spouting pro-Israel talking points? And so it has been, if nothing else, a little bit encouraging to see the protests that we've seen here in the US, the movement of people standing up and going, well, wait a second. Why is this the way that it is? Why is the US just supporting Israel because this is its ally? Why are my tax dollars that I'm being forced to pay, they're not going to, prepare or going to fix the roads, going to fix the schools, anything that would help my community. Now they're being sent overseas to carry out a genocide that the US is enabling. And so I think when it comes down to it, we saw a little bit of a preview when Harris was initially confronted by protesters, and she said some version of, oh, well, if you want Trump to win, then just say that. But as we know, anyone who has paid attention to these protesters know that they don't care about Trump, right? They know that Trump would be just as bad. He's just as pro-genocide. And so for her to try to frame it like that says to me that her team is not remotely prepared for the fall semester of protests that we could see here in this country. They're not prepared for the Americans who are going to come out and going to say, I don't care if you say you have good vibes. I don't care if you're a woman. I don't care about any of that. I care about what your policies are. And from everything we've seen, it looks like your policies are extremely pro-Israel. It looks like you're going to do nothing different than Genocide Joe, who's sitting in the White House right now. Nothing different than Donald Trump, who's looking at coming into the White House and who's going up against you. And it'll be interesting to see what Harris's campaign tries to do. I know that they are going to maybe try to play the game a little bit, but when it comes down to the election that we're facing, I will be interested to see what voter turnout actually looks like, because I think that there are so many Americans who are just so turned off by the two major parties. And maybe they've taken the time to go and to research third parties, right? Maybe they've looked into Dr. Jill Stein or Cornel West or Chase Oliver, or, well, I guess for a minute it was RFK Jr., although then they saw his policy towards Israel and they said, okay, we've seen enough. But maybe they've taken the time to go and look for those other options. But I think what concerns me about where this country is right now is that there is a lot of apathy. There's a lot of, I don't think things are ever going to change. I'm not going to vote for the two major parties. So at least we've gotten that far, but they still need to take that next step to say, okay, what else is out there? What are the other options? Is there anything that aligns with my views and what I want to see for my country? Because at the end of the day, that should be the conversation: is how do we want to move forward? How do we want to see things work in our country, in our community? And while we are the US empire that we are right now, there's still a lot of change that can happen. And so it'll be interesting to see how things come together in the next several weeks as we get closer and closer to election day. It's one of those, it feels like it's so far out, but I know it's right around the corner.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate your analysis on the show today. It was great having you on. Make sure you guys follow Rachel Blevins, who, as you guys see in this hour show, do a great job debunking empire propaganda. Well, just kind of, you guys know these are my favorite guests to kind of have on, to have serious geopolitical discussion. So make sure you guys follow Rachel. I'll pass to you. Any last thing you want to shout out? Any final thoughts that you have before we officially wrap up here? Thank you for joining us once again, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad I get to talk to you and speak to your audience. I know that there are a lot of like-minded people who, no matter what your political beliefs are, I think that calling out the US empire, that is a good starting point. And it's also something that a lot of us can unite on, that no matter what our vision is for moving forward, if we can start here to say, okay, we know that we have a problem, we know that something is wrong, and that this is not the right direction for our country to go in, that we are at least at a good starting point altogether, and it's something that we can agree on here.
Yeah, well said. So thank you for joining us, Rachel. Once again, I'm gonna pop you in the bag. Make sure you guys check out the show I did yesterday with Ozzy Kosak. That was a great conversation regarding Ukraine. Get great educational episode. I'm trying to pull up my guest for tomorrow. We got another banger, banger after banger. So I'm back from Chicago after the DNC. I told you we back in production. Oh, Danny Shaw. Oh, Jesus Christ. I almost forgot. We got Danny Shaw joining us tomorrow. So that's gonna be a banger. So I'll be back tomorrow. So there's gonna be a lot of cover. Make sure you guys check out JB. JB covered the Uhuru trial live in person on the ground. Make sure you follow James Fauntleroy. Make sure you support the RBN Network and support our guests as well for making time for us. Have a good one, guys. Have a good night. Take care.